So today we're looking along Connecticut coastline for any knappable rock at all if your area does not have flint, like Connecticut and like most of New England. We'll be trying to identify anything that's knappable. Quartzite, quartz, or siltstone even sometimes can knap. So if you're in an area with no flint, I'll show you how to find stuff. If you touch it too hard, it'll cut you, and that's how you know you can use that particular rock as a tool. It will cut you, look. Right through, like nothing. So I'm traveling along the shoreline in Connecticut, and I'm looking for rocky beaches. And on the rocky beaches, there should be knappable material like quartz, for example, or quartzite. And if I see any of the rocky, sandy beaches, I'll stop, I'll pull over, and I'll go take a look. But right now, I'm just, like I said, I'm just traveling along the coast. And you'll be able to see right up here as we pass what I'm doing and where I'm looking. So out there, I see what looks like a rocky beach. So I'm going to stop there and take a look around, poke around a little bit. So with the lithics around here, there's not too much flint at all. So if you're trying to find rock to practice on, or if you just want to work with your local material, this will be a good way for you to determine what's good for hunting, what's good for cutting tools, and similar. And I'll show you if I find anything. You have to look pretty hard and you have to go pretty long to try to find things. Quartzite here, and these are really sharp. You could use these as cutting tools. These will also make points if you know what you're doing. But the way I identified this as a quartzite was this, it's smooth and it doesn't quite look like any of the other white stones. It kind of has like a almost clearness to it. To kind of see through it just a little bit, as compared to something like that that's chalky. But if you look in here, you'll see it's very grainy, but it'll work. So let's take a look at what's right in the area here. We have this grainy stuff that you can't use at all. We have the quartzite-like stone that's grainy inside, which you can use. And then we have quartz, which you can occasionally use. This one might not be too good, but I'll give it a try anyway. This one's gonna be a little tough because it's so small. Alright, we'll just cut that piece out. So on these kind of stones, this is actually, I'm going to take this one because this will make a good grindstone for when I'm flaking the arrowheads. You could rub the arrowhead on the stone to grind the edge to make better platforms for flaking. So I'm going to make a tool out of this one, but this is not good for knapping. It's very coarse, and I'll show you on another one. If you try to knap this, it's very grainy and crappy inside, and you can't do anything with that. Anything that's grainy and coarse like that is generally not good for knapping. But if you look here, you can see here's quartz, and it's like a shiny white. Here's more. And if you look, it's very similar to the quartzite. And all of these can be knapped. These are too small though. This piece I'm taking with me. So I'm taking this, and I'm taking this. I could use this as a tool, and this is material for knapping. So just in testing this more, I just took another quick swing and knocked this flake off. And you could see it looks like quartz. And this would be really actually tough to make into a projectile point or an arrowhead or a spear point, but you can. It just takes a lot more effort than you would on flint. And this edge is very sharp. I cut myself with it just by lightly touching it. Gave myself a paper cut. But if you keep working at this piece, you could get many, many cutting tools out of this. And if you look at what I just did, you can see it does run flakes kind of like flint. One flake here, one flake there, and there's where you would take your next flake, is this ridge. You just grind it a little bit. Hold there. And you just keep working it down until you find pieces that you're able to use for what you're trying to go for. This would make a good little graver, they're called. You could punch a hole in leather with it. And it's very, very sharp, and because it's quartzite, it's very, very sturdy. So this will actually last a little bit longer than flint will. And you could just drill into things with this. But I'll keep looking. I'll look for something that's a little better material than this one. But I do like this stuff. I would use this. Got what looks like a little better piece here. And this is quartz. You can see the difference. This is white, this is smooth, it's not grainy, this is grainy. So this is not a good knapping stone. This is. It's not like flint, but it'll get the job done if you need something. Now quartz is a lot harder to get a flake off. I'm using a pretty big hammerstone, and even that I'm struggling with a little bit. Give it a try. This edge here is razor sharp, and this little piece here can be turned into an arrowhead. And on here, it came right off of there. As you can see, it is a little grainy, but that will work. Here's a pretty good example of smooth versus grainy, or not workable. Workable and not workable. See if you could pick out here which stones you think would flake. Which ones you could use as a tool and which ones you cannot. There's a few in this area. I'll point to the ones right in front of me here, which ones are quite possibly usable. It's this one here. It's that one there. And these two white ones, which are quartz. Now sometimes it's easier to see which stones you might be able to work if they're wet. So if you're in a creek and you're looking for something that you might be able to work with, you'll be able to see better if it's wet. You can clearly see the difference between the rock you can't do anything with and the rock that you might be able to. inside is clear. It's a little grainy, but you would be able to use this. So on request, I'm not using my tools. I'm using hammerstones that I found along the coast here. As you can see, it's starting to chip where I'm smacking on these things. But this rock here is a quartzite. A type of quartzite. As you can see, it's grainy and it flakes. So you would be able to use this piece. It's just very large for me. So I found one that I'll probably be able to use, and I identified it by the white in here. And as you can see, it's kind of hard to tell what it is, but if I wet it in the water, I want to show you what this looks like. Now you can see it's smooth, and it's something that you would be able to work. I could see there's already been a flake taken out of here. It probably smacked up against another rock. So, one of the things I wanted to explain with this is this is not flint. It doesn't work like flint. It doesn't look like flint. This is quartz or quartzite. And it's almost like the difference between saying I'm working on copper or I'm working on steel. Copper is not as good as steel, but you could still use it to cut. You could still use it for projectiles and hunting. Now this piece came right off of there. And this outer stuff sometimes is not so good, but if you get into the rock more and you really bust it open, the better stuff is deeper inside the rock. So if I keep working at this, it'll get better and better as I go along. These are better pieces. Now, as you can see, I could break those pieces off with my finger. If I try to break the piece itself, it won't go. So now all I would have to do on this point, really, is to flake this side, flake in there, thin the base a little bit, put some notches on it, and stick it on an arrow. And I'll actually keep this piece to show you what I mean. I'll flake it up and I'll see what I could do with it. So just to be clear, when I say grainy inside, it just means crystally. You could see the little tiny pockets of white in there, and it's not really rough as compared to this, which is very rough. You could feel it with your finger. It feels like sandpaper. And you don't want to try this on anything that feels like sandpaper. Now, another thing you could do on beaches, or creeks even, if you're looking for material, pretty much everywhere there's glass and plastic. And plastic could get pretty sharp if it's a hard plastic. You don't need much to make something to hunt with. So another technique you could use to test rocks. This one does not look so good, but it's the right color, right? And if I'm not sure, and I think it might be able to be used, put it on top of another rock. Be really careful doing this. You're gonna hit straight down into the rock on top of another rock, but watch your eyes. You should be wearing goggles doing this. So I took the end off, and that's super rough. This piece is no good. This is no good for hunting. This is no good for cutting. And even though it looks like it might be, it's really not. See, that just completely crumbled apart. And that piece is no good. So if all else fails and you spend all day looking for rocks that might work, could also find golf balls. Now, if you're on a beach, there might be birds flying around, and if you have a really good aim, you could just hit it in the head with a golf ball, and that'll work. So right here is a piece of floor tile. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you about, I was hoping I would find some of this. You're going to want to take a little, what is called a hammerstone, tiny one. You find a ledge, and you're going to take flakes off the tile. This piece here will make an arrowhead. Alright, here's a good example. So I just hit here, and it flaked that piece off. So now what you're going to want to do is you find the next, it's called a platform. A place to hit, a platform. And it's at an angle like this, so that your hammerstone has a spot to grab onto and peel the flake off. And if you keep doing this all the way around, you'll wind up with what's called a preform. And this could be further shaped with antler or your flaking tool of choice. You just start flaking the edges, and then you could stick that onto a spear or onto an arrow shaft. And tile, it dulls very quick, but it is very sharp. And you could work this whole piece with just a little tiny hammerstone like this. You just keep tapping, not too hard. If you do too hard, you'll break it like I did before. But this, I just sharpened up this whole edge. And you just do that all the way around. So floor tile you could find pretty much anywhere. Any kind of ceramic tile. You can find them in creeks, you could find them on beach fronts, you could find them even on old properties. But it'll work. It's brittle. It breaks easier than flint or quartz, but you can use it. And you're just going to want to grind the edges to smooth it out to give your hammerstone or to give your flaker a place to grab onto to peel the flakes off. So I'm noticing a lot of the same material here on this beach, and that's common for areas. They'll have a lot of the same type of rock. And if you just take a quick glance over, you'll see that a lot of it is the same color, a lot of it is the same consistency, and every now and then you'll find something that'll work. Now this is very, very smooth here, and this is probably the smoothest piece I found on this stretch of beach. So I'll test it. We'll see how it looks. Actually, it looks pretty good inside. Crystally. So I'll keep going with it a little bit. Like I said, quartz is a lot harder to flake than a flint or glass. Especially if you're using just a hammerstone. If you have like a copper bopper or billet, it'll be a lot easier to flake this because it's denser and easier controlled than trying to aim exactly on a hammerstone where you're trying to hit. I also see it's making little tiny sparks as I'm smacking it. So I'm not going to do too much more on this piece, but I wanted to show you, as I was knocking the flakes off, you could see this edge is very sharp. And you just continually hit. Just keep going with it. And you'll get the arrowhead shape eventually if you just keep thinning it and smacking along the edges, taking off flakes like this. Even this could make something called a bird point. As you can see, the edges, you could kind of break with your fingers, but at the core of it, this is stronger than flint. This could make a little tiny hunting point. So, on this particular beach here, I'm not seeing any really high quality stuff. Really crystally, really smooth. It's mostly a crystal grain, if that makes sense. Which will still work, but it's just harder to run the flakes. It's harder to thin it. And if you look at artifacts made out of this stuff, they're generally pretty thick. Because it is difficult to thin them down like you would flint or glass or obsidian. But in archaeology, you see stuff like this all the time. Especially made from little cobbles. They used a technique called bipolar reduction, and that was that method before where you put it on to something called an anvil stone, which is a stone underneath the stone you're working, and then you hit it and it splits the rock in a way that you can't from just trying to flint knap it by hand. It makes the forces in the middle from the vibration, from the percussion, splits the rock in half. Now you could do that if you stand a cobble up that's egg shaped. You could split it right down the middle by doing that. And then you just have to work one side to get a decent knife or a decent spear point. But with that method, I would definitely protect your eyes because the rock just explodes sometimes. It will go flying everywhere, shrapnel. But as I was saying, on this beach, there's not any high quality quartz or quartzite. But I did find stuff that's usable. And that's on a beach, a shoreline that I just stumbled across. So in people looking for lithics to work, there's stuff everywhere. You just have to experiment and you have to kind of know what you're dealing with a little bit. As I said, this piece here will make a perfect little arrowhead. I just have to trim up the edges a little bit. And I'll show that in a few minutes when I get back to the car. I do have an antler in the car. I always have an antler in the car. I don't know why, but I know why, but nobody else would know why. So I'll sharpen some of these up and I'll let you see what they look like. The other thing I was looking for, which is common to find, but I don't see any here, surprisingly, is like a slate or a shale. And those were used as artifacts. They were used for hunting points, they were used for knives, they were used for cutting up seal meat. But what you do with those type of stones, instead of flaking them, you grind them. And you do it underwater so that the dust doesn't get into your lungs and your eyes and your nose. But you hold it underwater and you grind it with something like this. You take a coarse stone, you would take your piece of rock and just continuously grind it like you're sanding it underwater though. Don't do it out in the air so you can breathe it in. It's very dangerous. And you just grind it into shape and then put it up, same thing, just put it onto your spear point, put it onto your arrow, and you're good to go. They use that often in the archaeological record, but everybody likes something that you could flake. People don't enjoy grinding so much. It's very tedious. These big rocks that you see here were left by the glaciers during the last ice age. They were pushed here like a big conveyor belt, and they were just pushed. And as the glacier started to melt and recede back, it just left the rocks where the glacier ended. And you can see they're huge, like there's one right here. Pretty big. One of the things that I find these good for is when you have a scene like this, there's an island way out there. And instead of getting your feet wet, just climb up on this. And you can wave, or look, or yell across the way, and they'll probably hear you. So one last thing on this particular beach here. If you can't find stone, you could find shell. Now, same thing with shell, you don't want to breathe this in. If you're shaping it, you're going to want to do it underwater. I'm just going to show you real quick, just one piece. I'm not going to mess with this too much. But it flakes like rock. Now this edge is super sharp. It's called an organic point. You could flake the edges, you could thin it down, and you could make a knife or a hunting point out of this. Just don't breathe it in. And that would be called an organic hunting point. So we're gonna finish up on this beach. There's a seagull out there. And I'm gonna keep these two pieces out of everything I've knocked off, just keeping these two. And I'll shape these up with antler. I'll show you what they look like later. For now, we're gonna drive around a little bit more and look for another spot to look for stuff to work. But it's getting later in the day. The sun goes down early here in New England. And it's cloudy, so it's going to be darker earlier. But we'll see what we could do for the rest of the day. Boop. He's eating the little tiny crustacean things on those rocks, as well as probably little tiny limpets, maybe. I don't know what seagulls eat, besides french fries. It's very peaceful here. See a duck diving way out there. Down the road a little ways, and I have my antler here. This is caribou antler put into elk antler. I have that little grinding stone I found on the beach and the flakes. This guy wants to see what I'm doing. So one of the things about the grinding stones is grind the edges to make sure that it'll flake well. That's all you really need to do. And usually I use a piece of leather, but I don't have leather today, so I'm just going to use my sleeve. Now, one of the things about quartz is it likes to crush rather than flake, but that's okay with quartz. And as I said, these were generally pretty thick. They were about as thick as this is right now, the artifacts. So I'm just going to shape it. As you can see, I already started to, along the edge, the cutting edge, the tip. problem spots on here that I can't get too good with my flaker. And this edge here needs to go, but I can't really push it off. I'm gonna keep trying, but as I've said, quartz is totally different than flint. It kind of crushes and flakes. So, as you can see, it's just kind of turning to dust, but I am shaping it. And I can't do too much because my shoulder's been really acting up past few days. I've been waiting for a good day to do this, but I'll show you what to do with this to make a good hunting point. You're just gonna wanna push the edges down a little bit to make a cutting edge. You're gonna want the tip to be as straight as you can and as sharp as you can, which I'm having a little bit of a problem with because of this one spot. So what I'm gonna do, because I can't finish this whole point with just this right now, it's too much on my shoulder, I'll show you what you would do to finish it. You just push in at the base to make a notch to tie. Now this base is pretty thick, but I thinned this spot. So if we slid the point onto the stick, I would have to get rid of this whole piece and cause all of that to be taken off so that it comes to a point there. But as you can see, it's the basic shape. The notches are there. You would sit this right on, sharpen the tip to a point, and you're good to go. And this is very crude, but it'll work. They used stuff like this. And that's just with antler and hammerstone on some of the toughest material there is to shape. So from my last gathering trip, I did have one more piece of quartz in the car here. And I'll show you how this is higher quality quartz than the stuff I found on that beach. And this stuff is way easier to shape. It's also from a cobble. You can see the outside of the stone here. But I'll show you how much easier this flakes than that stuff. So you're just going to want to experiment and find what works best for you. This stuff here is way easier to flake and get a good cutting edge. And you would just do this all the way around the piece, just as you would with flint or glass. Thin it down as much as you can. The base is super thick, so you're going to want to hit it with a hammerstone. And as you shape it, you can see it'll be a point. What do you think? No? Watch how conditioned these seagulls are. They know the sound of a car window rolling down because people throw food to these guys. He's waiting for food. Now he's gonna run over to her window because she opened her window. Get off my car, you bird. You shit on my car. Ew. Ew. What the hell, bird? I guess I have a new pet. Go away. Checked out a few more locations in the general vicinity here, and I'm not really seeing too much at these other little beaches. But we're going to continue this series with trying to find local lithics and what you can nap, what'll work, what won't. And it'll probably be a few episodes. And then we're going to also probably make videos of just how things look around here and what I'm used to up in New England. This is a common sight for me here on the coast. with those sounds. That is a seagull. So I'll also show like things that, you know, normally you wouldn't think of to make a tool from. Something like this. And what you could do with this, and, you know, people are always carving spoons and such, and you don't really need to carve a spoon. You could just pick up a shell and tie it to a stick and you have a spoon. Just make sure you clean it first, because it's kind of gross. It's been laying there for a while. Seagulls were eating it. I was talking to Leah on the ride over to this beach, and she was saying she wasn't aware that shell could flake, which it can. Even these clamshells, you could flake in shape, but as I've said, you want to be really careful with shell. You don't want to inhale it. You want to, if you're flaking it, you want to try to do it underwater or in a very ventilated space and keep it away from your face. But all these you could use as tools. The flatter you find, the better. I mean, if you find one like this, that's pretty good. And you could shape that and use that as a hunting point. There's a shotgun shell washed up on the beach. The other things that you can use that I will be showing if I find them around here is slate, shale, basalt, certain silicified shale, like siltstones. The other ones would be, it's called chalcedony. Apparently there's some of that around here. I haven't found any yet. But I'll be looking and I'll show you guys what it is as I find it. But for right here, there's a little pile of rocks right over there that I'll look at before I head out. We're losing light and it's getting a little cold now. So let's take a look real quick. Here's a little piece of quartz that you could use for a little tiny hunting point. I'm not really seeing too much here. There's stuff that is knappable that isn't too great, but you can use stuff like that. Anything that will flake, anything that will produce a sharp edge, like a knife edge, and you could do that. You could test them just by cracking off a flake like I showed before. When you crack off the flake, it should make a cone of percussion, and the edge of the flake should be razor sharp when you touch it to your skin. If you touch it too hard, it'll cut you, and that's how you know you can use that particular rock as a tool. Just be careful with it, it's just sharp. I found maybe 3 or 4 rocks that might be good. But this side is good. This is pure quartz, but this side is not good. So you're gonna wanna knock that away. I would hit right here to knock this off, but you can't flake this stuff. It's it almost looks like a granite on the quartz. But this whole section here, this whole ridge, if you hit right here, you could get a nice big flake coming off this line. You hit right into there. And actually, I'll just demonstrate it real quick. Let's see if there's a decent hammerstone. So, hammerstone, edge. See where I made those dots? That's where you want to hit. Now, if that would have held together, it actually would have broke that whole piece off, but I didn't hit hard enough. But, like I said, razor sharp edge, and it'll cut you. Cut me open. See that? And you just want to be careful. It will cut you. Look. Right through, like nothing. So, stuff like that you could use for cutting tools, and just be careful. Know what you're doing. Don't hurt yourself. And learn the angles of where you're hitting. So, like if I wanted to take this whole piece off here, this whole bump, this whole stuff that you can't use, you're going to want to hit like right there, right where I made those dots. I'll see if I could do it. As I've said, this stuff is really hard. Compared to flint, you really got to wail on it. I don't want to hurt myself right now trying to do this. There we go. All right, so I hit right there. You can see where I hit. And off pops the crap you can't use. So now I have a somewhat flat piece of quartz here that if I had the right tools, I mean, you could sit here and wail on it with a hammerstone, but if you had the right tools, like even a heavy antler, you could shape this down into a spear point, no problem. But I'm not going to do that for now. And I got to pick up the flakes I dropped. All right. So that's the other thing when you're doing this, you're going to want to pick up your flakes. Don't leave them behind. Sometimes what I do is I bring them home and I put them in a rock tumbler. It makes really pretty jewelry. Maybe I could show that in another video. But what I do with my waste, it's not waste, it turns into jewelry. It's very pretty. And that'll bring with me. I'll experiment with this piece. So one of the things I always teach people is, as you're doing this, as you're experimenting, everything you do, you're learning. As you're smacking on this, you're going to learn the angles that could take off the rock, and you learn how to shape it, and you learn what works and what doesn't. And, you know, I didn't think I would be able to get a flake like that off of this one, just because of how crummy this stuff looked. But I figured, hey, what the heck? Hit it, and got that off. So, just always experiment. I keep saying that, but that's what I do. So, with the thyroid stuff, my fingers are turning purple because of how cold it is and from smacking the rocks. My fingers were swollen in my last video, and they're not swollen anymore. But now that I'm adjusting to the dose of medication I'm on, this is one of the ways I could tell that I'm still too low. My fingers get freezing really easily. And it happens to my toes too, but I'm not going to put my toes on camera. And she also has thyroid problems. And she has the same thing as I do, except her hands get super stiff and she can't close them sometimes. She had something funny happen in her college class. She was messing around with silver nitrate and she spilled some on her hand. Now she has a nice tattoo right there. So that might be around for a while, but yeah. Anyway, so I just noticed as I was leaving here that almost everything in here is knappable, but it's somebody's driveway gravel, so I'm not going to touch that. It's all quartz and quartzite chopped up. So, yeah, I think we're going to check out one more spot before we head out for the day. And down that way somewhere. So I did find another little tiny beach, but we're starting to lose light there. And I think we're just going to do different spots and different videos. For now, I'll keep this video to that last beach, the explanation of that stuff, and pretty scenery. But this beach here doesn't seem to have too many rocks on it. It looks pretty combed. More to come. I'll be filming these locations with some tips and tricks. And share more of what I know with you guys. Always experiment with this stuff. You never know what you'll discover. I hope you learned something with these lithic points, lithic identification, and stuff that isn't commonly used in Flintknapping in modern times. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. Please like and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. And we'll get back to you soon with more stuff like this. Also, keep sending in those ideas because I'll make these videos for you. I'll show you how to do it. I did these with hammerstones. Somebody requested hammerstones, you got a hammerstone video. So keep sending them in. Thanks, guys. Does anybody know what I'm going to do with this? It's going in my pocket. It's a handle.